Hello and welcome to the Fertility Foundations podcast, where we go into detail about how to prepare the foundations for a healthy pregnancy. We dive deep into the underlying root causes for fertility issues and natural solutions. I want you to know that you're not alone and you're not broken. I hope that by sharing these episodes, they will help you move from feeling overwhelmed and lost to feeling hopeful and empowered to take charge of your own path to parenthood, because there are actually lots of things that you can do to help rewrite your own story. I'm Sandra Greenbank, nutritional therapist, functional medicine practitioner, coach and educator, specialising in fertility, pregnancy and postpartum health. I'm also the founder of the Fertility Nutrition Centre, where you can find fully trained experts in nutrition, lifestyle and functional approaches to healthy fertility and pregnancy. You can find more information over at www.fertilitynutritioncentre.org and also book a free strategy call with one of our experts. Today, I'm speaking to Kirsten Mooring about nutrition for twin pregnancies, because this really does add a different dimension to looking after both mother and babies. Kirsten struggled for years with fertility issues and pregnancy loss in her 30s and wondered if she would ever be able to have a baby. Looking for ways to support her and her partner's bodies and help their fertility, Kirsten's personal research brought her to nutrition. And much to her surprise, 2 little boys arrived. Having seen for herself the benefit to fertility of individualised nutrition and adjustments to lifestyle, she decided to retrain, and now she's a nutritional therapist specialising in fertility. Kirsten has a particular interest in cases of unexplained infertility and pregnancy loss, helping clients take back control over their fertility. But before we get into the interview, I wanted to talk a little bit about our podcast sponsors, Neovos. They're a UK lab that provide at-home health tests and cutting-edge analysis. I personally like their vitamin D and omega-3 tests, which are absolutely crucial to get right for anyone trying for a baby. Knowledge is power, and in my opinion, you need to always check, not guess, your levels of omega-3 and vitamin D so that you can supplement correctly if you need it. I found the Neovos test really easy to use and affordable too. The Neovos team have kindly offered us, our listeners, a 10% discount on their website using the code fertility at the checkout. Their website is simply www.neovos.com. All of these details are also in the show notes for you. Now let's get into today's interview with Kirsten. So hi, Kirsten. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, it's so lovely to be here.
We're going to be talking about twin pregnancies today and the nutritional things we have to keep in mind. And obviously, it's not one of those things you can sort of really prepare for as such. You know, we prepare for pregnancy, but you don't necessarily prepare to have twins. You just sort of end up pregnant with twins, so you still find out. But firstly, because you are a twin mum, I'd love to hear about your story, how, just everything.
Absolutely. I am a twin mum. We've got 2 boys. They are 7.5. And we did have quite a difficult journey to pregnancy. We met in our 30s, so we sort of met later in life, which probably, lots of people say, well, it's, you're old and therefore you can't get pregnant. And I absolutely don't believe that now. But then it put a lot of fear in. After the usual tests through the GP, because we've been trying for probably, I guess, 1.5 years, nothing. And they just sort of labelled us unexplained. Mm-hmm. Said there's nothing wrong with you, all your labs come back okay. So just go away and keep doing what you're doing. It's probably just because you're older.
How old were you at this point?
So at this point, I was probably about 37.
Okay.
38. So not like super old, but And then, I was probably about 38 then. We carried on trying. Nothing happened. We then decided that we would try IVF. And we had a round of IVF in our local clinic, which was just awful. I had quite high AMH, and they did manage to get quite a lot of eggs. I think we had something like 30 eggs.
Oh, wow.
Which is masses. But we only actually managed to fertilise 2.
Okay.
And when it got to day 5, there was only one of those left. Mm-hmm. So we had that one transferred, and I got ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome as well.
Okay. So did you have some PCOS? That sounds very PCOS-y.
Well, yeah, now I think that I did have PCOS without all of the syndrome. Yeah. So I think I definitely was polycystic, but have never been sort of overweight or any of the other things on the Rotterdam scale. But yeah, I think there definitely was something. And OHSS is just dreadful. Anybody who's experienced that will know it's excruciating. I was crawling around on the floor and in a lot of pain. And unfortunately, by the 14 days past, I wasn't pregnant. That one embryo hadn't taken. And I think that experience just well and truly put us off going through it again. So we sort of thought, well, we're not going to go through that again, because that's just, I don't want to go through that for my body again. We'll just keep going. And I'd always been interested in nutrition. So I guess I probably started reading around about that then. We then did fall pregnant naturally, but I had a miscarriage at about 10 weeks. Which was obviously devastating. Anybody who's been there knows what that's like.
And you'd been through so much as well already.
Yeah, and then when you're sort of, and also you've still got this sort of feeling that you're too old and that, it's never going to happen, and, there's no reason for it and all of this kind of stuff. And then you have a miscarriage, and the whole of the miscarriage experience is just appalling. I went through medical management and that didn't work. I'd had to go through surgical management, which was awful as well. So just a horrible experience. And then we kept on trying. I probably got pregnant again about 5 months later, and had another miscarriage at about 8 weeks. So by this point, I'm sort of starting to believe the hype. I'm starting to believe that it's not possible.
Yeah.
But I've still been doing a lot of reading around about nutrition and trying to look after both of us, trying to look after Alex, my partner, and sort of his body as well as mine, and feeding us well. But feeling anxious that obviously it's not going to happen. And then I did fall pregnant again. And this time it stuck. And when we went for a scan, lo and behold, there were two.
Amazing.
Which just blew my mind. We do have twins in my family, but it never occurred to me that it would be twins.
Guess you're just so focused on the one.
Yeah. And then there's just sort of all the anxiety about, now you're pregnant.
High risk.
And it's you're high risk, and now you're old, because by this point I was 39, and so now you're old and having twins. And so you're being, reviewed all the time, seeing the consultant, which I guess is a good thing. Yeah, just I can remember feeling intensely worried throughout pregnancy, and constantly worried that I was going to lose the pregnancy.
Yeah.
I think I was probably about 24 weeks by the time I sort of thought, well, maybe it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And that's really normal when you've had problems.
It's very common.
Yeah.
And I concealed it from people, even though I was huge.
Yeah.
I concealed it from people till about 20 weeks, because I just didn't want to tell anybody and then have to say that I'd had a miscarriage.
I know. Yeah, I can totally understand that, because I did the same, because I was told that my son had a heart problem, and they said, oh, well, next scan we'll see if it's, and I had to wait till the 20-week scan to see if he was going to be okay, and then there is that thing of like, I don't want anyone to know. And then I think psychologically hiding it away is quite, it kind of gets you down, doesn't it? You're sort of hiding it from yourself. You don't want to hope, you don't want to think about it.
And you're not experiencing the joy of it either. So you're having this pregnancy, which is miraculous anyway, as all pregnancies are. But here you are, and you're actually having a twin or a multiple pregnancy, and you can't enjoy it because you're too busy worrying about the fact that you might lose it, or that, something might be wrong with the baby or whatever.
Yeah.
But lots of testing, and I did have a harmony test, which was really good for sort of settling some of the nerves. And I recommend having that. I think that's a good idea. But yeah, and then went through pregnancy, and I have to say, I think I was reasonably well, actually. I did get big quite quickly, but I didn't have any health problems as such. I did have a bad back, but that's common in pregnancy, and I have suffered with back problems anyway, so that's not a big deal. But then at 36 weeks, I think I'd had another scan, and they said that the babies had stopped growing, and that they wanted to basically get them out straight away, which again was all very frightening. I think the way sometimes, the bedside manner sometimes of how these things are across to you is terrifying. And of course it's, the first time that we'd been through it. So, we didn't really know how to advocate for ourselves, and just found ourselves getting pushed through this sort of rush you through getting the babies out. So we did end up having a C-section, which wasn't really what we had wanted. But, the most important thing is the babies got here safely, and they were fine. They were little, but they didn't have to go into the NICU. So that was good.
Oh, wow. So you just got to take them straight home?
Well, no, because I was really ill.
Right.
I was really ill. I didn't react to whether it was the anaesthetic or the actual process of having a C-section. I'll never really know, but I was very sick, couldn't hold food down for 48 hours, and was in a lot of pain, and had quite a difficult time for some time after. So I think I stayed in hospital for a week. One of the babies went in the NICU for one day, but apart from that, they were fine. And then came out, and then I had a lot of postpartum bleeding is obviously common. It's part of the process, but mine went on and on and on for months, and turned out that I had retained placenta. And again, these are things that and I kept saying to the doctor, this isn't normal. I don't feel like it's normal. But it took 3 months for them to actually agree that perhaps it wasn't normal, and take me in, have a look, and then discover that I had retained placenta. So, yeah, so that side of things wasn't great. But, the babies were perfect. There was nothing wrong with them. So that was great. 2 little boys.
Are they identical? I can see a picture behind you. Are they identical?
No, they're not identical. They're not identical, although they did look very identical. And I have to say, even now, when I look at some of their newborn pictures, I really struggle. I used to put them down right and left, so which one was which.
I used to work with Ant and Dec, and we did, so it was like they always stand like that, Ant and Dec. So like,
so people know which one is.
Not that they look anything like each other,
but just so people know, because they're so synonymous, aren't they? But yeah, I mean, now they don't look that alike at all. But when they were babies, they really did. But yeah, and that's postpartum is a whole new ball game.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so obviously you sort of, you were saying you got to about 24 weeks, and then you maybe started to dare to hope. And I guess at that point started to connect with the babies and, all of this that you're going through. But you kind of only had 10 weeks of that because they came out so soon. So, and I think that this kind of dissociation from your pregnant body or from the baby can be a very natural defense mechanism when you've been through problems. And I believe that this can then have an impact potentially on your own mental health and your risk of postnatal depression. Absolutely. So how did you find all of that?
I wholly agree with that. And I think that it's actually very common in twin pregnancies. And I think it's not just postpartum depression, it's actually postpartum depletion.
Yeah.
as well, that sort of actually your body being completely devoid of, all resources, and how that can affect you mentally and physically. And for me, mentally, I was actually okay. Very exhausted, because obviously when you're feeding through the night and you're feeding 2 babies and changing 2 babies, by the time you've done that on a 2-hour cycle, you're doing it all over again. There isn't much time to sleep. But by about 3 months postpartum, with the combination of probably this sort of retained placenta, plus the exhaustion, plus having had a twin pregnancy, I was wholly depleted. And physically, my body showed me that I was, by having a huge eczema flare up, which I hadn't had for a very long time, which probably took me the best part of 2 years to heal. So it was a very real thing where my body was going, enough, we don't have the resources to deal with all the different things that you're doing. You need to do more looking after of your own health. And I just hadn't been prepared for that at all. I guess I just thought, you'd get your babies and you'd sail through, and yes, you'd be a bit tired and off you'd go. And it wasn't like that at all. And I think I was just physically, rock bottom, really. And I think if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I think I would have made much more effort to be more concise about how I had prepared my body for postpartum, not just for pregnancy, because I don't think I took that into account. And I also, although I tried to understand what a twin pregnancy might need, I don't think I had enough information to really give my body the resources to, develop, grow, feed 2 babies, as well as maintain my own health. And so whilst I'd been healthy before, was healthy through pregnancy, by the end of the pregnancy and a short period postpartum, there was just nothing left. And so I think that for me is something I'm very passionate about with all my ladies who get pregnant, but particularly with twin pregnancies, because it is so demanding on the body.
Yeah, because you talked about how you actually focused quite a lot on nutrition beforehand, and also wanted to ask, how did you keep motivated? Because that's tough as well, to sort of just keep going. And you were like, reading up and doing everything you could for both of you. But how do you keep going when you're just sort of coming up against sort of, miscarriage, another miscarriage? And
I think I was really lucky. I mean, Alex, my partner, is a very optimistic person, and he was just very positive about the fact that he believed that we would have a family. And I think that, while I don't believe that it's just positive mental attitude will get you pregnant, I do think it's supportive, definitely that sort of looking after how you feel about things mentally, and being able to talk about it and, perhaps have counselling definitely helps. But I felt like if I could get hold of something like the nutritional side of things, which the more I read, the more I felt like it was going to help, then the more I could take control of the situation. And I just didn't want to have that feeling of being unempowered by being told you're unexplained, because I just wanted to be able to put a solution to it. And obviously I never found out what the solution was, because I wasn't a qualified individual. But obviously eating in a particular way, eating better, must have helped in some way. And now I would probably be able to identify which of those elements were the deciding factors. Was it the fact that we ate more protein? Was it the supplements that we took? All those sorts of things. But it is difficult to keep going when you've had a couple of miscarriages. You question whether it's worth it, and you question whether it'll just be another miscarriage if you do get pregnant again. And unfortunately, if you do Dr. Google, then Dr. Google will tell you that the more miscarriages you have, the more you're likely to have, which isn't very helpful. And so you just have to kind of steer away from those sorts of things, and try not to read that kind of stuff. Read more positive stories and, you know, literature that makes you feel better about, you know, hopeful about the future.
So a bit of positivity, but also the right support or the right people around you who are going to keep you kind of afloat, I suppose. And that is, you know, the whole thing about you know, yes, you are more at risk of a miscarriage if you've already had one, but not if you identify the root cause of it. And, you know, there's so many things we can do.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point, I think, you know. I guess we might have got pregnant and kept the pregnancy sooner had I known some of those things then. You know, it's possible that, you know, I could have had different lab work, different tests, and come to some conclusions sooner that would have helped us to not have a second loss, for example. That nutrition on its own was supportive, but perhaps not directional enough soon enough. Without the help of the labs.
So what is the what is the thought now? Because I know the twin pregnancy research is just really kind of, there's not a lot out there with it. You know, certainly when you were having your babies, it was even less. So what do we know now about the needs, for example, of your nutritional needs during a twin pregnancy?
Well, and that's the difficult thing, because there aren't that many studies on twin pregnancies, and the ones that there are tend to be more reviews. So it's quite speculative, but logic kind of, if you use the data that is out there and then apply some logic to it, it does sort of make sense that if you're growing not one, but two or possibly more babies, then you will have more nutrient needs, and that your resources will be depleted more quickly than that of a mother of a singleton. So, there is definitely a need for more nutrient-dense diet, I would say, and having a focus on that is more important. It's important.
Even more important.
Even more important.
I mean, we know that, you know, as a mum, or, you know, if you're hoping to get pregnant, there are certain nutrients that are laid down in the run up to pregnancy, and the baby actually gets their nutrient stores from what you've stored rather than what's in your diet at the point of pregnancy. We also know that your body adapts, and actually, so your digestion and absorption changes to absorb more from the food that is in your diet. But there's obviously, you know, the rate limiting step there is kind of how much are you getting in, because your body can only absorb as much as you're getting in. You know, if it's not going in, it's not going to get absorbed, however good your digestion and absorption is. So that's where it really begins to make a difference, doesn't it? And it's not necessarily about eating so much more.
Absolutely. And it's about, you know, what are your personal levels? And I always recommend testing, because, you know, if we're talking about folic acid or folate, then you know, some of the studies suggest that you need a higher dose in twin pregnancy than the recommended dose, but it's very much dependent on the mother's levels already in her blood. So I would recommend testing that always, rather than just supplementing. And we know that we can get some from the diet. So if you're eating a diet that's, you know, heavy in, you know, dark green leafy vegetables and grains, then you'll be getting a good amount from that as well. So it isn't just a sort of cookie cutter approach of, definitely take twice as much. I wouldn't recommend that. It has to be on an individual basis. And you know, folic acid is so important because it's for neural tube development and retinal development. And I've definitely found with vitamin D that tends to be depleted in twin pregnancies as well. So testing of mums with twin or multiple pregnancies is really important for vitamin D, because again, just supplementing on the basis that you might need more isn't the right thing to do, because it's dependent on what level you're at already. And again, whether you can absorb. So how is your digestion? functioning at the moment? Is it worth doing a stool test to see how it's going? How are your bowel movements? Do you, you know, how frequently you're going? What kind of consistency are they? And then working on that to make sure that you can absorb enough from your diet, and supplementing if you need to on top of that.
I mean, with vitamin D, I think it's quite established that most people do need to supplement. But if you haven't done it in the run up to pregnancy and then we find that you're low, we're kind of stuck a little bit between a rock and a hard place, because there are upper limits or upper safe limits of supplementation. So again, the prep does become, really important. So important.
Yeah, and I think we know, I mean, if you're doing IVF, for example, we know there's a greater incidence of twin pregnancies and multiple pregnancies with IVF, even with the requirement to put a reduced number of embryos back these days. So it's worth bearing that in mind in the run-up to IVF, and testing and supplementing accordingly, so that if you do end up having a multiple pregnancy, you're already in a good place. Absolutely. Yeah.
What about iron? Because that's something that's always a little bit tricky. And do you make more blood if you have a twin pregnancy?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and they estimate that, again, you are making even more blood because you need more oxygen to feed two babies. So you will need more iron. And again, the studies suggest that more twin pregnancies, multiple pregnancies are likely to end in anemia. So yes, and again, that preparing for it, you know, and having, you know, good sources of heme iron in the diet before becoming pregnant is absolutely essential. But then continuing to eat them, and in twin pregnancy, that can be difficult because, you know, early in pregnancy it can be very difficult. Nausea can be a huge issue. So getting in enough nutrients in an early part of pregnancy can be a really difficult thing. So yeah, I would definitely recommend sort of eating those foods in the sort of 3 to 6 months before pregnancy. You know, if you've got twins in your family or you're doing IVF, then really focus on that in case it's you that ends up with a multiple pregnancy. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and we talked about prenatal or postnatal depletion or depression, or particularly for mental health, there's two nutrients that I always like to focus on anyway, which is zinc and omega-3, which is so important for your brain health and for your emotional health. And then again, do we have a higher need for both of those?
I think we do, definitely. I mean, omega-3, I think is a really important one for multiples. I mean, we know that we need healthy fats for brain development, and also to protect the mother's brain. So again, that's carrying through to that postpartum period. There's also evidence that having sufficient healthy fats in the diet contributes to healthy birth weight. So again, if you're having twins or multiples, that's important because they tend to be smaller. And also that it may impact gestation, interestingly. So if you want to try and maintain a multiple pregnancy as long as possible, and bear in mind that term is around about 37 weeks for twins and multiple, and less obviously for multiples, then eating enough healthy fats is really important. But so omega-3, again, we can test for that, and I would recommend that. But again, it's getting it into the diet pre-pregnancy, but also carrying it through pregnancy. Definitely supportive. And I would, unless there's a reason to not do it, I would tend to err towards the higher end of dosages for twin pregnancies. Definitely.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know if I already mentioned it, but you know, baby will take from the mum stores, and you know, we store omega-3 in the brain. Our brain is mostly made from fats, and the thing is, baby will be prioritized above you in in most instances. So, you know, we come back to this whole idea that as long as you look after mum, baby will be fine. You know, whether the baby's been born yet or not, look after the mum, and the baby will be fine. And so you need to really make sure that you're looking after your brain health and your nutrient stores. And also, I suppose, avoiding the things that deplete your nutrients, as well as making sure that you're taking them in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good point about looking after the mum. I don't like this idea of sort of eating for 2 or eating for 3. I don't think that's too blunt at all. To say that, okay, you've got a twin pregnancy, now you're eating for 3. It's definitely not right. But I think that, you do need to feed yourself consciously, and I think be very focused on what you're eating. And as the pregnancy goes on, I tend to find that women find it more difficult to eat large meals. So that's why we need to be really conscious about what we're eating, because it needs to be nutrient dense at each meal. It might be much smaller meals that you can manage to eat in order to maintain those energy reserves, those nutrient reserves for the mum. Because like you say, if she's well, then the babies will be well. Your body is designed to be able to manage that. And so, if you're eating properly during pregnancy, that will maintain your reserves.
And what about, so we talked about some of the micronutrients. What about the macronutrients? So the fats, carbohydrates and proteins. Do we have to be more mindful about any of that?
Yeah, I definitely am more mindful of protein. Because I think that, protein contains the amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. And obviously, we're not just building one life, we're building 2 in a twin pregnancy, or possibly more. So we need to ensure that we're eating enough protein. And again, that's on an individual basis. Protein is obviously a key part of repair as well. And when we're having a pregnancy, we're obviously expanding, the ligaments are stretching, and then afterwards all that's coming back to a relatively normal place and repairing. So we need all the amino acids to do that. So I always like to get my clients to focus on quality sources of protein, lean meats, eggs. If they want to eat some vegetarian sources, like tofu or tempeh, that's fine as well. Beans. The thing about some of the vegetarian sources like beans and lentils is they're great. They've also got good amounts of fibre in them, which is great for keeping the bowel moving during pregnancy. But they're less dense in protein. And you tend to fill up more quickly because they're full of fibre. And so that can be less beneficial when you haven't got much space because you've got this huge pregnancy pressing on your stomach.
Also, pulses and legumes can bind to nutrients and transport them out rather than allowing you to actually absorb them. So, I mean, beans are a brilliant source of, like you said, soluble fibre and, antioxidants, certainly if you buy the darker coloured ones. But yeah, I suppose being mindful of the fact that they also can sort of almost crowd out other foods.
Absolutely.
If you're focusing on them. So this is, I suppose, if you're vegetarian or, dare I say it, vegan and building 2 babies.
More challenging. I have to say I have not worked with anybody who's been vegan, but I do think it would be more of a challenge. And I certainly think that whilst I respect everybody's reasons for being vegan, it might be worth considering adding in some animal sources of protein during pregnancy, not just for your baby's benefit, but for your own health. And that sort of, we've discussed postpartum depletion, that possibility of falling into depletion post-pregnancy is very real, I think. So certainly, trying to get eggs in, and you can eat a cup of 2 or 3 eggs every day. That would be beneficial. Get some choline, get some B vitamins, get some protein. I think that would be something, and a move in the right direction nutritionally. But I do think it's more of a challenge.
It's tricky because obviously some people are really restricted by their religious beliefs or and that's just not going to be possible. And then, but then I think it does become really important to work with an expert who can make sure that you stay well and baby stay well. And like you said, if it's a sort of personal choice, perhaps, for a moment in time, maybe just look at more ethical sources of animal products if that feels possible for you. I mean, I know it's a really difficult conversation to have, but
it's so tricky.
We're looking at, in a vegan diet, we're looking at the lack of omega-3, B12, iodine, which is so important for your thyroid. And
thyroid, protein, which is so crucial all the way through pregnancy, and the demands on mum for thyroid. And in a twin pregnancy more so. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it can be, and iron as well can be quite tricky.
Yeah.
So how do we know if we're getting enough then? What are some of the tests that we should be asking for? I mean, is it just simply going to the GP or your midwife and saying, can you check?
I don't think you're going to get everything you need from your GP or your midwife, unfortunately. You probably could get a basic blood panel from your GP or the midwife, and that would be useful, certainly for giving you things like iron status. You might be able to get vitamin D that way, maybe possibly B12, folate, which is a good place to start. But for example, thyroid, it may not be possible to get a full thyroid panel. That's really important to understand. Often thyroid issues can begin in pregnancy because of the demands. We're making the thyroid hormones for the baby or babies for quite a long time during pregnancy, so it's a big drain. So that's worth seeing a specialist so that you can get some support on getting some labs. I also recommend getting tested for omega-3, and that you wouldn't be able to get that through your GP. And I think also a stool test is really valuable in pregnancy. So, and again, the kind of stool test that you would get from your GP wouldn't be as comprehensive as what we would offer in terms of looking at the microbiome and the types of bacteria that are living there, looking at inflammation and whether anything needs to be done in that area. So I think that's really important as well.
Really optimizing your digestion. Ideally you do that beforehand, because there's so much, hands are tied so much in pregnancy. If there's something that pops up that we want to, particularly if we want to remove something potentially pathogenic, that is going to not
do that in pregnancy.
Can't do it. So prepare. It's all about the preparation, isn't it?
Yeah, do the groundwork.
Yeah, I think also iodine's quite a good one.
Yeah, an iodine test is really, really worth doing. Definitely.
Yeah.
Do that as part of the thyroid.
And so what areas of twin pregnancies needs more support then, other than what we've just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously nutritionally, I would always recommend people get some advice on nutrition for a twin pregnancy. Even a well-researched, well-read person probably won't be able to find out enough, particularly without the test. So always reach out and get some extra help. I think it's really important to think about the postpartum period and not just about that depletion element. So again, preparing preconception during pregnancy, but also then preparing for that period postpartum. So, even things like batch cooking and all of those good things, but also preparing for how you're going to feed. So how you're going to feed the babies. Are you going to try to breastfeed? If you are going to breastfeed, then being really conscious that you might need some extra support. Breastfeeding twins and multiples is more challenging. It's totally doable, but it is more challenging. I think it's worth understanding that, if your babies go straight into NICU, for example, that you may want to have colostrum to give them, even if you don't manage to feed longer term, if you can get the colostrum early doors. So learning how to do that and considering maybe trying to get some before the babies arrive, and put it in the freezer so that you've got it. And then if you're ill or you can't do it when the babies arrive, at least you've still got that, and you're helping them to develop their gut and their lovely microbiome. So definitely look at getting the right support for twin and multiple breastfeeding. There's a great, lovely group on Facebook, which I always point people to, which is run by a collection of twin and multiple parents, and some of them are also lactation consultants. Always look for an IBCLC lactation consultant. There's a wonderful woman on there who is one, and she's also a multiple parent herself. She's called Catherine Stagg. She is just fabulous. But I think also it's that community which is very good for, your mental state postpartum, when you're up in the middle of the night and feeding, to be able to talk to other mums that are also in the same situation is very important. So getting that support. I certainly found that if I'd known what I knew postpartum that I'd managed to find out about breastfeeding before, I would have had an easier journey with breastfeeding, because it was really challenging.
I know. I mean, I always do this as well. I'm like, research your nearest, breastfeeding cafe. Find a breastfeeding consultant, put them in your phone, so that once the baby's here and you need the help, you're not then, blary-eyed trying to just, because it's so hard. So just get all, work with one of us who can just help you kind of, make sure that you've got, you ask for the help, maybe up front, to say, baby might get here from week 30. You might want to say to people, if you're popping in, like, you bring me a lasagna or something for the freezer, it's like, don't bring me flowers.
Don't bring me flowers or chocolates.
Bring me a meal for the freezer. And I suppose, I had a baby in special care, and they just absolutely steamrolled me into giving her formula. There was just no, and this was now 14 years ago, so things hopefully have changed. But do you think it's worth kind of researching your formulas and things like that beforehand as well?
Yeah, I definitely do. And getting some advice about that from somebody who can understand the formula and the products that are in it, because some are definitely better than others and some have got quite a lot of nasties in them, is a good thing to do. And I don't actually know how much it's, changed. I think it might change from one hospital to another. But certainly my experience was also to be driven into bottle feeding, and the most important thing was to get baby fed, which, whilst I understand that it is important to feed baby, I think that a little bit more support can help women to get to breastfeeding sooner. So if you are going to then have to have done some research and not be sort of steamrolled into a particular brand because that's the one the hospital uses, is a really a good thing to have done. And then just sort of understanding your own needs for nutrition postpartum, if you're breastfeeding, are still increased. You still have a need for nutrient dense meals, higher calorific value, because you're producing extra food source for not just one but two little people. And
much more fluids as well.
Much more fluids. You might need to drink about 3 litres a day, or possibly even more. Definitely don't become dehydrated, because then milk source will be much more likely to dry up. And I always say to all my mummies to keep snacks nearby, but healthy snacks. So, if you need to keep a jar of peanut butter or almond butter in the bedside table, and, a box of almond crackers or something, oat crackers, then at least you've got something that's healthy and nutrient dense that you can have, so you don't start feeling, depleted in the middle of the night, because that can be very real as well. And then you can end up sort of rushing downstairs and pulling out the first thing that comes out of the cupboard, which is a chocolate biscuit or whatever.
I used to always get and I actually recommend all my clients to tell their partners before they leave for work to put a pint of water at every place where I might possibly sit down, because once you with the baby to feed them, because the minute they latch on, you're parched and then you can't get up. And
that is so true.
But also, I mean, they say that the more sort of bottles and things that you have at home, the less likely you become to breastfeed. And I guess that is true. But at the same time, I imagine as a twin parent, you might want to share the feeding, even if it's getting them used to a bottle to have breast milk, if you're able to also pump in between. I mean, I don't even know how you'd never sleep because you're like either feeding or pumping. But do you think it could be a good idea to kind of research the bottles and the teats and, make sure you've got plastic free things and all of this?
Yeah, you definitely want to find BPA free teats and bottles and understand how you're going to sterilize them and all of those sorts of things. It can definitely be worthwhile having a bottle, and I don't think that anybody should be guilted into not using a bottle if they don't, if they want to, because it is very challenging. It's challenging enough with one, but if you've got more, it's hard work. And definitely, if the other parent or, a grandparent or somebody can help with that, that there will definitely be a benefit to it. Often lactation consultants can give good advice about which, teats are better to use, so that if you're trying to breastfeed and bottle feed, that you don't get rejection of the breast, because obviously there can be problems with that. If you're bottle feeding at the same time. So it's good to sort of arm yourself with that information beforehand. I think if you prepare for all of those things, none of them might happen. You might sail through breastfeeding, and it might be the easiest thing in the world, or it might be really challenging. But if you've already done the research, then you'll have that ready to go, and you won't have to try and find it when you're already exhausted, and trying to find out information, and probably feeling quite emotional. And it's difficult if you feel you can't do the one thing that you're supposed to be able to do, which is feed your babies. Then that can be a very emotional time. So if you prepare for difficulties rather than trying to deal with them at the time, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I imagine also because you have such a sort of turnover of kind of feeding, changing, sleeping, and then they'll sleep, but they sort of sleep in shifts, and then you sort of never get your shift. But if you are able to get that one feed over to somebody else, then and you could get a stretch of say 4 hours sleep, that is going to actually really help your breast milk production, because sleep and I think protein and fats, those are the three kind of magic things that if you can get them all in, and I know it's hard to sleep ever when you've had a baby, certainly when they're little, but if you could just get somebody to help you.
Definitely. And I think if the other parent could even do that sort of last feed of an evening, so that you can go to bed early and maybe sleep between sort of 9 and 12, then at least if you're getting up to do the 12, you've had a block of 3 hours, and that will really help, because it is very difficult to get a break when you've got two, and during the day you probably won't have that much time to sleep if you're on a rotation of feeding on a couple of, if you're trying to get them to put weight on, you may have to feed every couple of hours. And I always say to people, you were saying about some, a grandparent feeding or something. If somebody's going to come round during the day, yes, don't come and bring me flowers. Please bring me food. And the other thing is that if you're going to hold the baby, then you're holding the baby so I can go and have a sleep. That's really important.
Or a wash.
Yeah, or a wash, exactly. But something that will give you some time back. So whilst you're delighted to see a friend or a family member, if it can be somebody that you can trust to watch the babies for half an hour whilst you have a shower, or 2 hours whilst you have a nap, then that's going to be really beneficial to your health. And I think that's more important than coming around to have a coffee that you've probably made, and a piece of cake that you don't actually need.
I remember having after having my first, and the in-laws came with there's so many people in the house, and we had a split level flat at the time, and I was running up and down stairs after 10 days in hospital with a baby and special care. And I was running up and down the stairs with teas and coffees, and no one brought a bag of food. And I remember thinking, I was quite offended about that at the time, but people don't know, do they? They bring a cake, but that's not as useful. I think if anyone's listening to this and their daughter or friend is about to have any baby, let alone twin babies, go in, unstack the dishwasher, restack it,
yes.
and hold the baby. If mum is happy, not everyone is happy, and for people to hold a baby, and you should never impose yourself in that sense.
No,
but I believe it's actually okay to impose yourself in terms of that dishwasher thing, because that was the one thing I could have cried if someone would have done that for me, I think.
Yeah.
And then just bring a meal. Any meal will do. And even there's so many healthy options now in the supermarket, even like Deliciously Ella, or even Cook have some really good options.
Absolutely.
And and also think about the fact that you're kind of a one-armed bandit when you've just had a baby. I mean, if you've got twins, you've got no arms, but if you've got one, you're sort of eating with one hand. So don't bring me something that needs two hands to eat. It needs to be something you can just literally grab and have.
Definitely. I think that's so important, just to give people some time back, it's valuable time that they can use for rest, which is so important postpartum. I think there was one other thing that I was thinking about that I found really difficult, which was actually just getting out of the house.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to come around and help you get out of the house, that's also really valuable, because again, if you've got to change one baby, change another, by the time you've done all that, you just don't feel like going out anymore.
Somebody poos.
Yeah, somebody poos or is sick or wakes up and needs a feed, and all of a sudden it's you're starting all over again. You don't want to leave. So sometimes just having somebody who can come and help you in those early months, the first 3-4 months when it's a real challenge and you're just learning, even if you've been a mum before or a parent before to a singleton, it is different having twins. And I've having spoken to parents who've had singletons and then had twins, they've been just as shocked as those of us who had twins first. And I'd think about even things like, how are you going to get exercise? Pushing the buggy is great, but think about, where do you live? Is your buggy going to be too wide to push on the path? So do you need to have a buggy that's one in front of the other so that you can actually easily push it on the footpath? Or like me, are you not going to be able to get a buggy out at all because you live in the middle of the countryside? In which case, how are you going to carry them? And I carried both on the front whilst they were really tiny. Yeah. And then when they got bigger, I carried one on the front and one on the back. So, all those things, it's worth thinking about them early doors, because then you don't get overwhelmed with, I've got so much to think about and, I don't know how to do it all. So these are just some of the things that you can sort of prepare for while you're pregnant.
Gosh, yeah, I mean, it sounds lovely, but also horrendous. So just anything you can do to make it those early days easier.
Yeah, really.
It's going to be so useful.
So useful. Yeah.
So we're sort of running out of time, but I just wanted to, because I know people will ask about supplementation. What do you think about, do you think it's important to supplement and keep supplementing during during breastfeeding, or?
Yeah, I do. I would carry on taking your pregnancy multi-nutrient postpartum. But again, in terms of supplementing per se, I wouldn't supplement without testing or without getting specialist advice, because otherwise I think you're just, as we discussed before, you could potentially be spending a lot of money on supplements, and if your digestion's not working very well, then you won't be absorbing, or if you don't need it, then you'll just be peeing it out. It's just expensive wee. So whilst I do think that supplementing can be very beneficial, I would always advise try and get your nutrients from the diet first, and get some specialist advice in terms of whether you do need additional support from supplements for a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kirsten, how can people find you if they want to get in touch?
I've got a website, www.kirstenmooring.com, or you can find me on Instagram at Kirsten Mooring Nutrition. And I'm usually in one or other of those places, so get in touch.
And you have loads and loads of experience for twin pregnancies, but you help people in all areas of fertility and pregnancy.
Yeah, I do. And because of my own experience, I am particularly interested in twins, but I take a strong interest in unexplained infertility and also those who've had miscarriages and recurrent miscarriages, because we know that there is so much that we can do in terms of trying to unfold that story and find out what's lying underneath and what the imbalances might be that are driving those unexplained stories that might actually be explained.
Just unexplored.
Yeah, just unexplored.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed this chat with Kirsten, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Please like, save, share, and rate this podcast if you found it useful, as it helps us reach more people. Also, don't forget your 10% discounted test with Novos using the code fertility. And if you're looking for a fertility specialist to support you, our practitioners can be contacted over at www.fertilitynutritioncenter.org, and they all offer a free strategy call to help you decide on your next steps on your journey. Thank you for listening.